If you live in or around the Northern California area, stay tuned to the end of the video for an important announcement regarding Arlopalooza 2018. Hello, my beautiful friends. So I've been thinking about the Switch recently. Yeah, just to change things up a little bit. Specifically, I've been thinking about Nintendo's plans and desires for the system. The company has given a lot of statements on this subject, naturally, but two things have really stood out. The first one is a little silly, but it's certainly something worth talking about. Shigeru Miyamoto stated in an interview that Nintendo's ultimate ambition is for every single person to own a Switch. You heard me right. Every single person, period. And last time I checked, there were, about 7 billion people in the world. We have to assume that Shiggy wasn't completely serious when he said this. It's possible that he was just saying that they're working with that goal in mind, and that's actually not a bad idea. It's good to shoot for the stars, aim high, work with a really, really big goal in mind to motivate yourself and avoid limiting yourself. For the sake of conversation, though, let's try to imagine how close to that goal the Switch might be able to get. The Wii is Nintendo's best-selling home console, selling 100 million units, and it did so well because it tapped into the casual market, pulling in people of all ages. The DS is their best-selling console, period, coming in at 154 million units, largely for the same reason. The Touch Generations games were enjoyed by many, many non-gamers. I firmly believe that the casual ship has sailed. The Wii and DS came at a time when the world of consumer electronics was extremely limited, but now that we've got tablets and smartphones, that itch for simple games and helpful applications has been thoroughly and permanently scratched. For this reason, one could assume that the Switch might not even be able to hit 100 million. Take the Wii's sales, for example, and remove all the owners who weren't exactly gamers and wouldn't exactly go on to become core Nintendo fans, and what do the sales look like? 60 million? 50? 40? 30? We can't know for sure, but we know it's probably not even close to 100 million. The Switch does have a few things going for it, though. One, it's bringing in people who've lost touch with Nintendo or even gaming as a whole. As always, we can't know the number of people for sure, but it sounds like it is fairly significant. Then similarly, the Switch is just so awesome, especially when held up by titles like Super Mario Odyssey and Splatoon 2, that Nintendo's making some new fans. It's attracting kids in a big way. The 3DS has been bringing in a lot of kids too, and since its drastic price cut has always been really affordable. It's followed the trend of Nintendo's handhelds selling better than anything, currently sitting at 74 million units with an ultimate total of 80 million certainly in the cards. Very good numbers, but still pretty far from, 7 billion. If the Switch keeps bringing in the kiddos, there's a good chance that it will at least get 3DS numbers. But there are other factors to consider. The Switch is a lot more expensive than the 3DS, which could hurt its numbers. It will go down in price, but it's hard to believe that it will ever be as cheap as a 2DS. Cheap enough to just buy one for each of your kids. On the other hand, the novelty of playing big home console quality games on the go is very strong, which makes the system a lot more valuable and has already had a great effect on sales. Then on the same note, when people have access to that novelty at a much lower price down the line, it could spur sales even faster. But we're getting too deep here. Let's move away from the particulars and land on a number. Like I said, I don't think the Switch is going to win over a bunch of non-gamers. It's a video game system. Only people who like video games are going to buy one, despite Nintendo's lofty goals for Labo and games like 1-2 Switch. So we've got to look at the video game market as a whole to judge how many units it might possibly, maybe in some reality, sell. Well, if you're only talking about console gamers, you PC gamers are an enigmatic bunch, so I'm going to leave you out of this particular conversation, sorry. PS4 and Xbox One owners pretty much comprise all of non-Nintendo console gaming. There's overlap here. There are people who own both consoles, but for the sake of this discussion, let's just cram those two numbers together. Xbox's 37.7 million and PlayStation's 79.9 million make 117.6 million. They'll continue to sell this generation as well, so let's just round it up to 150 million. Why not? Then when you look at Nintendo fans, the 3DS probably represents most of the core ones. You'd be hard-pressed to find a big Nintendo fan who didn't at least buy a 3DS. So let's add in the 3DS numbers and round up again. Now we're at 230 million. Then add in the potential newcomers and older returning fans. Heck, let's just make it an even 300 million. There's no way that number's accurate, but let's just say for one moment that there are 300 million people in this world right now who like to play video games on consoles, and that every single one of them suddenly discovers that they love Nintendo games. If the Switch sold 300 million units, the guys at Nintendo would quite literally be crushed under the weight of all that money. It would be the most successful gaming console in history twice over, Yet even that completely unrealistic 300 million still makes up a pretty darn small percentage of the world's population. Realistically, I think 100 million would be a really good number. That's definitely a lot, and I could see it selling closer to 3DS numbers, or maybe even less, but if Nintendo continues to develop big, exciting games for it and starts to price it more aggressively down the line, I think 100 million is at least possible. That's like my best case scenario for the Switch. It's selling so well, even at this price, that I think a few years from now, if it ever hits 200 bucks or somewhere close to it, that affordable Nintendo handheld thing is gonna mix with that home console experience thing and make for one very successful system. It's the power of both of Nintendo's software divisions all in one little system. Every Nintendo game on one device. Yeah, I could see 100 million, especially considering those newcomers and return fans. Though, quick note, none of this takes into consideration the idea of Nintendo releasing a true successor to the 3DS to live alongside the Switch, because that's an idea that's so disturbing I don't even want to think about it. Anyway, so no, the Switch will not quite sell 7 billion units. It will not be owned by every person on this earth, including infants and people in comas and people who hate video games. But that's not the only goal Nintendo's mentioned for the Switch. Perhaps more interestingly, they've said that they want the Switch to have a good, long life. And that's not surprising. After the failure of the Wii U, they've got another big hit on their hands, so naturally they're going to want to make the most out of their new success. But let's look at the exact numbers. The guys at Nintendo expect to support the Switch for 7 to 10 years. Now, the definition of the word support is always up for debate when it comes to game consoles. Does supporting the Switch mean developing most, if not all, of the company's games exclusively for the system? Or does it mean releasing a handful of smaller games while putting most of their efforts into the console that comes next? Nintendo is still technically supporting the 3DS, but it's obvious that the lion's share of the company's resources are going toward the Switch. Regardless of how many of those 7 to 10 years will see full support or partial support, however, those numbers are still on the higher end. Before last generation, Gen 7, console cycles typically lasted about 5 years. Due to the advance of technology and the rising costs of game development, though, these cycles have been getting longer. Sometimes it's hard to say exactly when one generation starts and another begins, but I think it's safe to say that Gen 7 lasted 7 years. And if you judge Gen 8 by the life of the PS4 and Xbox One, then this November will mark its 5th birthday. We never know what will happen, but the general consensus seems to be that the PS5 and Xbox X1, SX 260 or whatever will release in 2020, making for another 7-year console cycle. Assuming this is true, it means that if active support for the Switch lasts 7 years, the little console will be Nintendo's primary one through most of Gen 9. At the higher end of their estimate, 10 years, it means they could be ready to release the Switch's successor right at the start of Gen 10. The Switch was released at such an odd time that I'd say they've knocked themselves out of the whole generation thing, but longer support could potentially line them back up again. Either way though, whether it's 7 years or 10, they want to support the system for a good long time. The question is, can the Switch survive that long? Well, I did say that I think the system will sell pretty well as long as they keep the games coming, especially considering that the longer it's alive, the cheaper it will get to manufacture, and the lower the price they can charge for it. So I suppose a better question is, should the Switch survive that long? Should Nintendo make a big push for longevity in this case? I'll admit right now that I don't have a definite answer to this question, though I will say I'm skeptical about such a long lifespan, and I would like to explore a few different perspectives on the matter. First, there's the issue of third-party support. Now, indie games, probably not ever going to be a problem. The vast majority of indie games are developed with lower budgets and simpler graphics, so the Switch will probably have no problem running all the indie games we could ever want for its entire lifespan. AAA games from major publishers, though, are another story. The Switch is significantly weaker than the other current-gen consoles. It's only a little more powerful than the Wii U, which was about as powerful as the PS3. This means that Gen 7 games like Skyrim and cross-gen games like Resident Evil Revelations 2 run like a charm. If it was on the PS3 or the Xbox 360, it can run on the Switch, no problem at all. But when you're talking about Gen 8 games, PS4 and Xbox One games, things start to get messy. Bethesda is at the forefront when it comes to Switch support, having ported over both Doom and Wolfenstein 2. These games are truly Gen 8 games, with all the fancy graphics and everything. But of course, many sacrifices had to be made to get those games to run on the little guy. Panic Button's efforts were certainly laudable, but it's obvious that this is no easy task we're talking about here. These ports work, but it's a close enough thing that I'd say any more sacrifices and they would no longer be worth it. They push the Switch so close to its breaking point, and because of this, we haven't really seen other AAA Gen 8 multiplats on the system. Not a lot of studios are willing to go through the effort. So if this is already a problem now, How do you think it's gonna be 3 or 4 years from now when Gen 9 is in full swing? Because to be honest, I'm not super confident that next-gen games are gonna be able to run on what is just a smidge above Gen 7 hardware, even with compromises. Now, there's definitely more that companies can do to downscale games beyond just lowering the resolution and frame rate and some of the fancier effects, as we saw with Doom and Wolfenstein. You can make just about any game in the world run on Switch if you were willing to go in and redo all the models with lower poly counts and rework all the textures and everything. The Wii ran plenty of multi-plat games just fine because they were reworked to better fit the hardware, but this process is time-consuming and expensive. It's basically remaking the assets for each game. The good thing is that if the Switch sells a ton of units, then these kinds of ports will be much more worth investing in. Again, that's what we saw with the Wii. The sales numbers were so crazy that sticking Call of Duty on the thing was a no-brainer. But the more the other consoles leave the Switch behind in terms of graphical power, the more costly and intensive port jobs will become. And if right now, Doom and Wolfenstein is about the extent of the Gen 8 multiplats, I'm not holding my breath for Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield to hit the system in 2024 or whatever. The second reason I'm hesitant to fully support the idea of a very long life for the Switch also has to do with graphics, but it's less about the greater industry and more about my own desires. I don't know how many other people share this opinion, so I certainly won't speak for anyone, but at the very least, I can go the self-centered route and say that if I have this opinion, statistically, there's probably at least some percentage of people who share it. A significant percentage or not, I don't know, but I'll talk about it anyway. Let me start by saying that obviously graphics aren't everything. If I thought they were, I sure as heck wouldn't be a Nintendo fan. They're not the most important thing that goes into a game, however, I do very much enjoy good graphics, and don't let anyone tell you that that's wrong. Fancy graphics could even be your absolute favorite part about video games, and if that's the case, more power to you. It's just fun to watch technology at work. Art style is the most important thing, which is something that indie games often teach us, but there's still something to be said for raw power, for individual blades of grass and complex shading and actively rendered water. It can be very beautiful and even heighten immersion. Like I said earlier, right now the Switch has a few things going for it in the graphical department. There's the novelty of playing games with Gen 7 graphics on a handheld console, looking out over Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, or examining the exquisite texturing on a chain jump in Super Mario Odyssey, all while holding this tiny little thing in your hands. It's amazing. Then there's the increasingly common opinion that graphics are getting so good, even older games are holding up super well. The Xbox 360 came out 13 years ago, yet I still look at some of the games on it and go, dang, that's pretty. So that's where the idea comes in that differences in graphical fidelity matter less and less as time goes on. I've even said myself that I don't necessarily need better graphics on the Switch right now. Mario and Zelda and Splatoon and Mario Kart already look so nice that I can see myself being satisfied with the system for a good while, especially considering Nintendo's tendency to go with smooth, cartoonish styles for most of their games. Here's the thing though, I might be satisfied now, but I can't honestly say how long that will last. 7 years is a long time, and 10 years is an even longer time. Even now, whenever I boot up a PS4 game, there's that little part of me that's like, man, I'd give anything to play a Nintendo game this pretty. It's like, no, I don't need all this foliage and these realistic shirt physics, but they're modern conveniences that I sure do enjoy, an awful lot. And when I inevitably go back to my Switch, I start dreaming of the day I can get graphics like that on the go. Picture the year 2022 real quick. 4 years from now. The PS5 and the Xbox whatever have been out for years, and we're all somehow, through whatever crazy voodoo magic big developers are able to conjure, playing games that look substantially better than even this. It's the 9th generation of video game consoles, and we're closer to photorealism than ever before. You're on your PS5 and you're playing Horizon Zero Dusk, and the world is alive. You're in it. It's more amazing than your younger self ever dreamed video games could be. Then later, you boot up your Switch, and what do you play? A game that looks like an Xbox 360 game. Nintendo put themselves a whole generation behind in the graphical department with the Wii, but now they're 2 gens behind. You're playing big first-party Nintendo games at a graphical level that is now 17 years old. 1 year shy of being old enough to vote. I don't know about you, but by 2022, when this scenario is a reality, I think I might find myself wanting for more. And even in 2022, the Switch could still have 2 years of active development left in it. Maybe even more if they end up going with the 10-year plan. Now, one thing that could help a little here is the release of something like a Switch Pro, an updated, more powerful version of the console. PS4 and Xbox One games generally have to get patched in order for them to get the most out of the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, but the Switch has something of an advantage here. Lots of its games already actively scale performance based on what's going on screen and whether you're playing in handheld mode or docked. We see dynamic resolution a lot, where pixel counts fall in order to keep the frame rate up. I don't know much about this stuff, but I believe that theoretically, this means that a quote-unquote Switch Pro could enhance games games right out of the box, no additional development required. It probably wouldn't make the graphics better per se, but they would come in at much higher resolutions. If Nintendo were to release such a thing a few years from now, it wouldn't solve this whole graphics thing, but it would certainly help take the edge off. Even if I can't have mega fancy textures and effects, it would be nice for most, if not all, of the Switch's games to offer 1080p graphics at 60 frames per second, even in handheld mode if the Pro comes with a screen to support the higher pixel count. And heck, I might not be a big fan of the idea, but if Nintendo was keen on it, they could encourage developers to bring over more AAA ports as Switch Pro exclusives where they might actually be able to run. Really though, we just can't say for sure how things are going to go down. Nintendo could pull some move that upends this whole thing. Or it could turn out that they end up supporting the Switch for 7 years, but that means only 5 years of active development and 2 years of the sort of support they're giving the 3DS. A little lighter with most of their efforts going into games for the Switch 2 or whatever. That's actually the outcome that I'm hoping for, to be honest. Gen 9, it can wait. PS4 games still look so good, they could wait another 5 years to release the PS5 for all I care. Make it a 10-year console cycle, why not? The Switch though? It's awesome, and I'm relatively happy with these graphics for now, but I'm also very excited about its inevitable upgrade. 5 years total before the Switch 2 comes out, and I get to play uncompromised versions of Resident Evil 7 and The Witcher 3 on my tiny little handheld. Yes, please. Thank you for watching this long and rambly video. If you would like to tell me how my assessment of the Switch's graphical capabilities is all wrong, or how my obsession with defining console generations is misinformed at best and damaging at worst, feel free to do so down in the comments. Before we go though, it's time for an extremely important Arlo Direct! Arlopalooza! Woo! The official event page for Arlopalooza 2018 has launched, and let me tell you folks, this year is gonna be bigger and better than ever. Mario Kart and Splatoon tournaments again, other games and stuff with lots of prizes to win, and wait, what's this? A familiar face with a very special and exciting message? I'm Lockston, and I'm gonna be at Arlopalooza this year. This is my real voice, definitely me. See you there! Wow, thanks Lockston. That's right, Lockston from over on Noggin will be joining us as a special guest. So follow the link in the description for more info, and if you're interested in going, please, please, please read the entire event description on the Facebook event page. It's got everything you need to know, many important things to know about this year's Arlopalooza. RSVP if you can go, please don't RSVP if you can't go, and whatever the case, please don't mark interested. I hate interested. Like, what does that even mean? What am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to plan? I gotta know how many people are coming so I can plan. I gotta plan, guys. I gotta know how big of a venue to get. I gotta know how many clowns to hire. I need at least 1 clown per 3 people. It's very important to me. We hope you can come. Arlopalooza 2018! Woo!